The Houston Cougars coming off a big one over the weekend, but can't cheer them on for too long. Got a big one on big Monday night against TCU. The Horned Frogs come to town.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to a crossover edition of Locked On Cougs and Locked On Horned Frogs. I'm your host of Locked On Cougs, Parker Ainsworth, joined by Stephen Simcox of Locked On Horned Frogs. I always want to say Locked On TCU, and it's not Locked On TCU. I always almost get that wrong. Stephen, outside of correcting me in my head several times, how are you doing?
I'm good, Parker, and I didn't fight for that, but I'm glad it's Locked On Horned Frogs. I think it sounds more distinct. I was going to ask you, did Houston play UCF in football this year? Did y'all square off with them?
I haven't. No, we haven't had any connection with UCF since we got a UCF show.
So I did and this was pre-UCF show, which you should subscribe to Locked On UCF for sure.
All the Big 12. Get your latest on all the Big 12 shows.
Yes, but I said Golden Knights, which apparently is a faux pas. When I was introducing the host, I was like, yeah, the UCF Golden Knights. And he immediately kind of recoiled. And then he corrected me in a gracious way. And the YouTube comments that day were like, you idiot. And I was like, my bad. I didn't realize I didn't know it was a thing. So it's not that type of thing. We'll go by Locked On TCU as well. And I'm glad to be rocking with you during basketball season, Parker, which I imagine is Houston Cougs fans' favorite time of the year right now.
It's a great time of year. It's a lot better time of year than it was when last time we would have talked, I guess, was in text messaging back and forth about Manjack. That was not the same. That was not the same uplifting type of year for us. Stephen, how is Joseph doing on campus there? Can you pat him on the back for us, tell him we miss him?
I will. Yeah, I think it's a great fit. I mean, he's going to step right in. J.P. Richardson, whose career came to an end, TCU career at least, in that bowl game, the Mexico Bowl. He'll be moving on, so I think Joseph can slide right into that kind of inside/outside wide receiver role and be a factor. I was joking with you before the show, as painful as it was, and I did a post-game show after that loss on a Friday night to the Fighting Willie Fritzes, and I was like, fire everybody. This thing is over. I mean, this ship is burning down. We made the Houston offense look like the greatest show on turf. I mean, I'm surprised we didn't get everybody in the transfer portal after that game. We should have probably had Chris come over and just say, "Hey, brother, let's get into it." But all kidding aside, that was a great performance by Houston that night, and TCU didn't show up, and they got whipped for it. And then that was honestly a big turning point in the football season for them. Like after that bye week, they kind of figured out how to run the ball. They were physical, and they ended up winning 6 of the last 7 ball games, which is huge for Sonny Dykes and his future with the program. But I'm super excited about Joseph Manjack. I feel like the numbers didn't always tell the story, but every time I watched him play, he just popped. He made plays, he made things happen, and I think he's the type of player that TCU wants. With the continuity they have coming back with the football program, they just need dudes who can plug in and say, "Hey, let's hit the ground running." And Joseph's been around long enough and has a ton of experience to where I think it'll be a really seamless fit for him.
He's a fan favorite. Houston fans are very adamant about no one's wishing him ill or anything about even though he went within conference, right? And then I also think you mentioned didn't always come out with stats. He's a great blocking receiver. He's the first guy to make a tackle after you throw a pick. I mean, he's just a great all around football player. And like I said, I'm sad to see him go. Hope y'all take good care of him up there. And there's really only, I don't even know, I haven't even checked the schedule to make sure see if we play each other or not. That'd be the only game I wouldn't want him to go off in because I think it would just hurt a little bit too much. But Stephen, you mentioned something about the football game that I think does segue into the basketball game a little bit because you said you thought it was like a great transition point for last year's football season when TCU lost to Houston, kind of has a look in the mirror kind of moment, springboarded forward. I would argue last year's basketball game between Houston and TCU was kind of the same thing for Houston basketball. Houston lost their first 2 road games in the conference, both close games, both competitive games, and then went on and bluntly only lost one more conference game between then and the conference tournament on the road at Kansas a few weeks later. And so I feel like, weirdly, they're similar in that way. TCU I thought was pretty good last year, and then I looked at the roster coming into the season and thought they're going to be pretty good again this year. And I don't mean this as negatively as it's going to sound, but I don't know how else to say it. They haven't been horribly impressive in the win-loss column thus far. Quickly, how can you catch up a Cougar fan on how TCU's been thus far?
Non-conference play was pretty rough. I mean, basically anytime they played somebody with a pulse, they took an L, with the exception of a win against Xavier at home. Got beat by Michigan on the road, had a really rough tournament, short tournament run around Thanksgiving. I lost to Vandy in the Big 12 SEC Challenge. But the basic story of this team, there are some highly rated freshmen that have come in, David Punch, Micah Robinson, and they were in an ideal world, they were supposed to gel really well with some experienced transfer players. Frankie Collins, the point guard from Arizona State, Noah Reynolds from Green Bay, Trezarian White from UNC Wilmington. And it just hasn't played out that way. One reason is Frankie Collins, who coming into the season was supposed to be like your floor general, true point guard, distribute the ball type of guy. He went down with a broken foot after that Vandy game. And honestly, Parker, I mean, he was leading the team in points. He was leading the team in assists. He was leading the team in steals. Like, he was doing a little bit of everything. I feel like he's their best on-the-ball defender. He was their best shot creator through the first month of the season. So his absence has been felt in a big way. Defensively, it's just been inconsistent. There are nights where they play really well. There's nights where the effort just hasn't been there. And I think the communication with a lot of new players has struggled. They've struggled on the glass at times. So all those things that are like kind of hallmarks of basketball teams that are struggling, those ingredients have been there for TCU. I will say this, over the past couple of weeks, I mean, they went toe-to-toe with Arizona on the road, lost that game 90-81. Caleb Love just shot the lights out that night, unfortunately. But TCU put up a lot of points too, and it was a competitive ball game, late in the second half. They come back home. They have a nice comeback, and they beat Kansas State. So I feel like they're playing better. I think typically with the Jamie Dixon team in his, TCU era, they have had one or more like inexplicable, just weird non-conference losses. But as the season goes on, they've kind of found their footing. So I'm seeing that light switch come on, but this is going to be a very tough matchup against a really good Houston team that, Parker, I mean, they beat BYU down in that Big 12 opener. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, has there been a big change? And I know they took 3 losses in a tough non-conference schedule.
Yeah.
Or is it just, more of that talent kind of winning out as the year has gone on?
Well, and I think there's also some gelling. Anyone who's followed the Cougs knows that they returned at least, you could say, 7 of their 8-man rotation. You could even argue 8 of their 9, although they didn't go to 9 a whole lot last year. And last year they won the Big 12 regular season. The deal is that one that went missing, Jamal Shedd, went pro, is now in Toronto, getting good backup point guard minutes up there. That was a big loss. Big 12 Player of the Year, All-American, et cetera, right? His jersey's going to go up in the rafters at some point, I'm sure. There. And Fertitta Center, I will say, they lost to Auburn the second game out the gate. They lost to Alabama and San Diego State, both in neutral site things at the Las Vegas Players Era NIL tournament deal. Thanksgiving, like you said, that's all 3 losses before November 30th. And while they haven't played the most challenging schedule since then, A&M, Corpus Christi, Toledo, whatever, et cetera, they kind of have had some time to kind of get their feet back under them. Jamal Shedd was not just a great player; he was also the point guard. Milos Uzan steps in. Locked on Horned Frog fans may know that name because he was at Oklahoma the last 2 years as their starting point guard. Was a freshman, all conference or like a all freshman, whatever, as a Big 12 guy a couple of years ago. And he's kind of figuring out how he fits into this a little bit more, which I think is a challenging thing to do, right? You mentioned new guys and your own point guard and that kind of thing. I want to ask about that. You mentioned that Collins and down the injury, that's never good. Houston fans know from a couple years ago, guards going down can really throw off the offense. And if it happens early enough in the season, you might have time to rebound. Do you feel like this TCU team is kind of rebounding and figuring out, okay, without Frankie Collins, who are we? Because that would actually make this kind of a dangerous January for a lot of other teams, right?
I think there's some guys that have stepped up. So Noah Reynolds, who transferred in from Green Bay, I thought, like, my perspective on him was, okay, sharp shooter. He shot like 40% from 3 last year, can spot up, can beat you that way. But he's been really aggressive lately, Parker, and that's been effective for them. they're a pretty balanced scoring team, but I would say he's kind of emerged as the main dude. And then Vashawn Ouellette, who had an interesting story. He was asked to leave Old Dominion's team as a true freshman, and I think the main reason was just because they were kind of tired of dealing with him. But he can score the basketball, Parker, and so far people are really happy with how he's fit into the locker room. So it's working. I would say he's a volume scorer. The efficiency isn't always there. He's going to take a lot of shots, but for a TCU team that needs somebody who can create, some buckets, he's been a good piece for them. I think the tricky thing is, I would love to see more of the young players, and we'll talk more about like Micah Robinson a little bit because I know you have some background with him. But David Punch has been very effective down low. He's more of a rim protector and somebody who can, get lobs, affect the game that way. And he pairs pretty well with Ernest Uday, even though they somewhat have the same game. They've been a good pair defensively and making plays around the rim as well. So in my mind, I'm like, man, this feels like a season where you really need to find out what you have moving forward. But I think Jamie Dixon's perspective is more focused on trying to salvage what they have right now and find a way to stack up wins and possibly be a tournament team. So he's trusting those veteran players to do that. And to his credit, Noah Reynolds and Ouellette have been two guys that have stepped up in a big way. When we come back, Parker, I want to ask you about expectations for this current Houston team and maybe where the fan base is with how the last few years have played out. But first, I know we got to get to one of our great sponsors.
Right. I want to talk to you about the same kind of things, but today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And right now, at America's #1 sports book, you can put down $5, get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 back in bonus bets, win or lose. That's big news for you. FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. You can visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 back in bonus bets for just placing down that $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Make this season, the NFL playoffs are about to start, guys. Unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Stephen, as we look at this, you mentioned Jamie Dixon and adjusting, and you had some questions about Kelvin Sampson and kind of what people are expecting, what fans' expectations are. Mm-hmm. Without getting too far ahead, because I know you got questions, I want to talk through them with you. I got to say, I think the expectation is that they match that FanDuel line of Houston minus 19.5 on Monday night. I think Houston fans want to blow the doors out of this one, get that bad taste from last season out of your mouth. But you got other questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, we got to get to predictions later in the show. That's such a great deal from FanDuel. One $5 bet. You hit on that, you get $250 in bonus bets. Even somebody with a sports broadcasting degree like myself knows that that's a good investment.
No math in that. No math in your degree.
No math. One community college math course is all I needed. I mastered it and I moved on. But I was wondering about this Houston program because, okay, you had a great team last year. You get up into the tournament. These things happen. It's happened for a few seasons in a row. Jamal Shead leaves. He leaves a huge presence there. Are people at all frustrated with how the last few seasons have ended? Are they expecting more from Kelvin Sampson? I know they're not that far removed from a Final Four run. I understand that. But do you get the sense that there's pressure on this year's squad? Is it kind of like hey, even though we got a lot of returning players, we lost a huge player. It's sort of a reset. What is the general vibe around the Cougs fan base about this current team and this current Kelvin Sampson outfit?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different directions that can go in because I do think coming into the season there was expectation. The Final Four's in San Antonio, you're right, and so you're thinking like, hey, that's not too far from home. Much like the 2023 season when it was actually in Houston, you're thinking, hey, if we get there, we got some home court advantage. This thing we can really cut down some nets. Sampson's been very adamant about he wants to play to a Monday in his career. For the folks that maybe more football centric don't know, like the Final Four is played on a Saturday, and the national championship game is always the Monday right after it, right? So he's always talked about get to Monday. And this year's team returned a lot of guys, like you said. I do think that after the Auburn game, there was kind of a resetting of expectations. I think people kind of thought they saw this non-conference slate with Auburn, Alabama, Notre Dame, and then you had a couple other good teams you could have played like San Diego State in that Las Vegas thing. Butler and then the Big 12 gauntlet after that. I think people had some high expectations and kind of had to reset those once you lose a couple of those games, obviously. I don't think that they expect anything less than a year ago. The last couple of years you had last year was Jamal Shedd's ankle. Year before was Marcus Sasser's groin. And then a couple of years before that, you actually had like everyone got hurt mid-season. But people get injured and kind of slows your roll. And they're thinking if we can get to this March Madness big dance healthy, we got a real shot. I will say, though, that I've got people in my comment section every day. They're probably writing right now about how they start 2 6'8" guys. They have no 7-footer, and that's going to hurt them. And then I've got guys talking about how their offense is very NBA centric because of Sampson's time in the NBA and how that doesn't work in college. And people talk about how they have too many times to go through scoring droughts and yada, yada. So there are absolutely people that have their picking nits of sorts, right? But I think on the whole, there was a reset after the Auburn-Alabama game. It's okay, this is going to be a growth season. You're seeing people grow over the course of the year. And we're going to know a lot more about how this team gels come like late January, early February. Because there were certainly people last year, Houston didn't lose a non-conference game, that people kind of assumed that was going to be the same kind of deal. And it was a more challenging slate for sure. And so I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I think that there's a wide range of expectations on a program that's been the Sweet 16 every year since 2019.
Who is the engine for this team? I know LJ Cryer is a scorer, and he can lead the team. Juwan Roberts has been around for a long time. I know this is also a Houston team that it's built on defense, it's built on hustling, making plays that way as well. Best all-around player, or I guess kind of the heart and soul of this Houston Cougar team so far this season.
They haven't necessarily had a guy that's like the guy fall back on a bucket every time, like the Jamal Shedd was a year ago or Sasser the year before that. And those guys are both in pros now. It's hard to replicate that. But I will say from like a leadership standpoint, I think Juwan Roberts is the vocal guy, the super senior with the COVID year on top of it all, right? Power forward has started 3 or 4 years in a row now. And, he had 20 points against Oklahoma State about a week ago at this point, but it's not like his marquee thing is going and getting a bunch of points unless they need him to. It's really, he is the first one to dive on the floor for a loose ball. He's going to go get a bunch of rebounds, and he's got a left hook. I mean, in basketball sense, I guess he could probably fight you if you wanted him to, but he's got a left hook that'll leave you a little silly. And, Houston does keep track of things internally, like, they call it floor burns, guys down on the floor, tips, guys that deflect passes and things like that. And he leads the team in a lot of those typically. He is a heart and soul guy in that sense. I don't know that he's necessarily always the fall back to score it kind of guy. That's where you get to LJ Cryer. And LJ Cryer is, shooting 40-something% from three right now. I think it's 42 after the game of the weekend. Manuel Sharp shooting almost 50% from three. They got guys like that too, but the heart and soul guy, I think, is still Juwan.
Going back to the culture thing, I don't want to make this team sound like it's Tony Bennett's Virginia team. So that's not who Houston is. But I do wonder. You talk about the floor burn stuff. TCU has they call it the BTF belt, like the big tough frog, and they track similar things, deflections, loose balls, all that stuff. But in my mind, Parker, I mean, you coach high schoolers, kids that play basketball, as teenagers. That doesn't, like, a lot of the things that Houston values, that doesn't seem like the coolest thing in the world. What's the secret sauce? Is it just they're finding the right kind of guys? Is it the winning takes over and people say, hey, this is the way we do it? How do they get everybody to buy in and pull the rope the same way like they seem to do on a yearly basis?
Well, and you're really kind of seeing what I'm about to talk about with their current class of 2025 recruits. They have 3 5-stars. They don't just go get anyone who's talented. Obviously, there's like a talent threshold. You got to be XYZ talented to play for a Big 12 basketball team. But they will absolutely go get a kid that plays the right style for them, as opposed to finding a kid that's just, getting 30 points a night in high school. I think a great example of that is he starts now. He didn't start the year as a starter, but Jojo Tugler, who is a Houston area kid, so that helps a lot. Guy's 6'8" with a 7'6" wingspan. And you heard that right, 6'8", 7'6" wingspan. And he is like leader of things like floor burns and deflect passes and tip shots and stuff like that. He was a lot of people's best player at a Houston area in high school. But you know, with a guy like Jace Posey on your own team, like there's a lot of talented players in the city of Houston, and he was kind of the lone duck in his own recruiting class in the city of Houston as far as like guys that Houston really went after hard because of the style he plays. They didn't go get some guys that went and got a bunch of points that maybe now, look at NBA kind of stuff because they score a lot of points per game. They went out and got Jojo Tugler. Well, Jojo is a transformative player defensively for this team, right? Emmanuel Sharp was a kind of kid that got out of Florida, same kind of thing. They go out and find these kind of kids that are, kind of recklessly throwing their bodies around and playing that kind of very hyper physical style. And then they kind of, obviously with the talent threshold that I mentioned, they kind of formulate the culture from that. They don't get guys that wouldn't fit in. If Houston's looking at a kid, it's because he will fit in. And I think that there are, and I know I'm going long here, but there are fans that like Houston's got this outstanding freshman named Mercy Miller, who had a 68-point high school game and stuff like that. Son of Master P. There's a lot of celebrity around his name or whatever, right? He was a top 60 player in the country. But Mercy is having trouble finding his time on the floor because he is learning the way, right? And it sounds like Mercy's on board with that. It sounds like Samson's on board with that. It sounds like everyone involved knows, but not every high school kid would take to that very well. They knew what they were getting with Mercy, and he knew what he was getting into, right? So that's, I think, really the establishing point. I know that Jamie's a very well-respected coach in a lot of the same regards, and I do want to ask about Jamie and how he's adjusting to a team that maybe isn't as talented as some of his years past, and how they're going to, I think, still upset some people, hopefully not Houston on Monday, throughout the year as well. But today's show is brought to you by Game Time. And if you're looking for tickets for this game or any other game, I cannot think of a better place to look than Game Time, because right now, the 12-team college football playoff is an incredible experience. Games all over the country, including the Cotton Bowl, just a few hours north of Houston, I guess only an hour or so away from y'all at TCU. Mm-hmm. And Game Time is a new feature called Game Time Picks that can help you get tickets to these kind of events, even the big ones like the Cotton Bowl and stuff like that, and make it even easier. It filters out the fluff. It helps show you the incredible deals on great seats. And I've actually used this for a couple of things, including some recent Christmas gifts. I don't know about you, Stephen, but Game Time is a great place for that because you find the best value in any kind of a venue. You can see exactly what it's going to look like from your seat in that arena for that price point. Stephen, tell me about Game Time.
Yes, quick personal story. My parents, because they love me, they got me tickets to a Baylor TCU basketball game coming up later in January, but they used a ticketing app that I will not name because they are not Game Time, and the order got canceled. And so they couldn't find the tickets. At first, I was like, oh, it's because my dad doesn't understand technology. I look into it. No, it's because this other ticketing app just canceled the order. It was a whole thing. Anyway, I was like, don't worry. I get on the Game Time app, Parker. Within 5 minutes, you know how it works. I got tickets on my phone, and I'm like, here, I got it. All you got to do is it's all good. You can just pay me back, and we're all square. So I'm going to get to go to this ball game because the Game Time app is so easy to use, and I love it. Download the Game Time app today. Locked On College, that promo code, $20 off your first purchase.
Locked On College, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, $20 off. Get a game like Steven, myself, or others. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Steven, I understand that talent fluctuates. People go up and down. Programs go up and down. I don't mean to say any one year is indicative of any other. And you mentioned that there's been a major injury at TCU with Frankie Collins, and missing that link is a big deal. Are you expecting this team to have a better Big 12 run than certainly their non-conference? Are you expecting them to have a NCAA tournament kind of run, or is the gauntlet of the Big 12 going to get to these guys?
It's going to be tough, man. I think just week in, week out, it's going to be tough to hang, but I do think they've improved. Jamie's teams, they always play hard. They're always physical. You talked about the upsets. They've pulled off upsets the last few seasons in games where it looked like they didn't have much of a chance. I think the frustration for TCU fans right now they've gone the portal route very heavily the last couple of years. And I would say to Jamie's credit, that's paid off. Like, they rebuilt the team around Mike Miles a few years back, and that worked. They got to the NCAA tournament. They won a game, had a chance to upset Arizona, just couldn't quite do it. Then the next year, kind of up and down, but they did make the tournament again. Similar situation, run into a good Gonzaga team in the second round. This past season, they made the NCAA tournament. They got run out of the gym by Utah State. But this year was supposed to be kind of a change-up because they had a pretty highly rated, for TCU, a highly rated high school class coming in with a lot of young players. That talent hasn't seen the court a lot so far, and it feels like that he's really leaning on these veterans to try to find a way. Can we scrape out 9 or 10 wins here in conference play, which traditionally in Big 12 basketball, that's going to get you a bid and a chance to play in the postseason. So I understand the strategy. I think it's just when, the question for, I think, the TCU program moving forward is Jamie has elevated it so much. I mean, like, before he got here, there was really little to no history. They were in a really bad place since moving into the Big 12. And he's gotten them to a place of respectability, but can you take that next jump, right? And that's tough for everybody. It feels like this year is kind of a rebuilding year in hopes that they can get there. I do think that patience is starting to wear on a certain section of the fan base, even though overall I think most people are still happy with what's going on.
And let's talk about that, because they got a lot of freshmen on this team. And obviously, and I'm sure it'll come up, the connections I've got, Micah Robinson finished his high school career at Oak Hill. He's been to a bunch of high schools. I was lucky enough to get to coach him at one of them. Jace Posey, Houston area kid. I think my listeners will remember that name because he was a big high school area product. Yeah. Even Adam Stewart is a big guy. He went to Waller, which is outside of Houston. So some folks may remember that name. There are a lot of talented freshmen on this team that don't seem to be getting a lot of minutes yet. Is that a frustration for fans? Is it just much like Kelvin doesn't play freshman always, is it just kind of a Jamie thing? They knew where they were getting into it. What's the story there?
No, I think it's a frustration. I feel like whether it was fair or not, there was kind of an expectation of, okay, you can sell me on a rebuilding year if I feel like I'm watching the future of the program. Like, if I'm watching Micah Robinson figure it out in real time and making mistakes and they're somewhat competitive, I can look at this and say, okay, well, hey, we're taking our lumps, but he's understanding, he's getting better, he's building towards something more. Jace Posey and Isaiah Manning were supposed to be kind of the guys that people assumed would take the torch and run with it. And they've gotten some more run. It's just been inconsistent when they've had a chance to play. Now, David Punch is the guy I mentioned earlier. He has gotten a lot of opportunities and he's excelled in it. And I think he fits what Jamie wants to do, and he checks a lot of the boxes, kind of the program building thing you were talking about earlier. But yes, it's frustrating is the short answer. And I feel like if the losses pile up, which it remains to be seen, I mean, they're 500 right now in a very small sample size, then that will become more of a source of frustration for this team. Okay, Parker, 19.5, brother. That's a big line. I know it's on the road. I know it's a quick turnaround.
Yeah, I just kind of threw that in earlier. 19.5. Both teams played Saturday. Here's what I will say is Houston's defense is stifling. They've played 2 Big 12 games so far, Oklahoma State and BYU. Oklahoma State was averaging in the upper 70s. Houston held them to 47. BYU was averaging 85. Houston held them to 55. I think that's the deal, is they're anticipating TCU struggling to score. Now, with that being said, Jamie Dixon has had his own fair share of making the game ugly kind of games throughout his career. So
yeah, he loves a rock fight, brother. He's not afraid to get in there and do it.
19.5's a big spread. Good teams win, but great teams cover, Stephen. What do you tell me there?
Yeah, I think this is a tough matchup for TCU. You talked about Houston's defense. I feel like the lack of shot creators is going to be the big challenge for the Frogs in this ball game against a defense that's going to swarm them. And they're coming off a ball game against Kansas State where they just got destroyed on the glass, which is also not a good recipe. And that's the thing. If you're going to miss shots, then you have to find a way to at least crash the boards and give yourself a chance. That being said, quick turnaround. I think TCU is going to come out with a lot of energy. They're going to play hard. And the emergence of a guy like Noah Reynolds, Vashon Ouellette, Bean scores. I'm not picking the Frogs to win, but they're going to cover, Parker. I feel like this is my bold take. This is my hot take. Move over, Stephen A. Smith. Frogs cover. They lose, but they cover. And everybody get out there and make your FanDuel bets today. What do you think, Parker? How's this going to go?
I think Houston wins. Ken Palm has it as 17. I think it is going to be in the high teens. 19.5 is a lot. I think the truth is that I wonder if 2 days after playing, if Houston's going to have the legs to score enough points to make it like that, right? Like against Oklahoma State, they were up by 20 and 30 at one point and ended up only finishing that game with a 13-point difference, right? I wonder if it's going to feel more like that because of how close these games are. I will say I would have thought when the schedules were drawn up that BYU on Saturday was going to push Houston harder than they did. Houston did get to sit their starters for the last few minutes, like 5 or 6 minutes, obviously, in that game and stuff like that. So maybe they're more rested than I think, but I do think it's going to be like that where Houston gets the 22-point lead and then it kind of falls under that to 16, 17, somewhere in there. I'm very confident in the Cougs in this one. You got to win your home games. Houston's only lost 6 games in Fertitta since it was built. And I feel like that's going to be 30 or 31 straight home victories on Monday night. Now, I don't mean to rub that in too much. Quickly, what's the elevator pitch on the way TCU wins this game, Stephen?
Prayer. No, it's not just prayer. Even though
it is Texas Christian University, right?
Yes,
that is
yes, it is. I think you're going to have some unexpected contributions. So you got to have solid minutes, not only from your guys that I talked about earlier, but can Micah Robinson give you double-digit points off the bench on a Monday night? Can you get something from Jace Posey and Isaiah Manning, even if it's just the occasional corner three? Relentless on defense, have to rebound well. Ernest Uday and David Punch, can they protect the rim well enough against as you said, like not a 7, maybe they don't have 7-footers, but they got plenty of size on that Houston roster. And get out in the fast break, get as many cheap. I know Houston limits that really well, but get as many cheap and easy points as you can and hope that you can, survive a good atmosphere. But I mean, it's a tough matchup. I think the line's a little out there. And TCU should compete, but I'm excited to see it happen on Monday night. And Coug fans, feel free to, jump in the comment section here if I end up being wrong.
Well, and it would be the most me thing possible for like my man Micah to go off against my own Houston Cougars and really upset me on Monday night because I've seen him go off a lot in high school basketball games before. And of course he'd do it one more time as in they're watching. We'll see. Micah's a very talented scorer, big, strong kid. I feel like he's grown into the role, and I actually like to fit with him and Dixon a lot. But we'll see how the rest of the season pans out. And frankly, I'm sure if he has drawn a couple games, I'll get a text from you to let me know. But as always, crossover editions are a lot of fun. Stephen, Locked on Horned Frogs daily podcast. Where can people find you and that show?
Subscribe to the YouTube channel, also on your favorite podcast platform. I'm on X at Simcox Stephen, as you see in the box there. And Parker, where can they find your fine work?
Same thing, wherever you get your podcast, Locked on Cougs, and on all your social media platforms. I'm at Painsworth512, Painsworth512, wherever you're on social media these days. Thank you guys for tuning in to a crossover edition for a big Monday basketball game. Went a little long on it, but it's just too much fun. Basketball's too much fun to let slide. I was in the show with Go Cougs. Do y'all go Frog? What is it?
Go Frogs. I'll do it. Yeah, go Frogs. There we go.